one time. Go grab your guns. I'll tell you one time. This day belongs to us. Why?
Wow. Sorry. That just doesn't sound as sweet as it used to. I turned down the bass gain in my headset, and it's just not as awesome as it was before. But what am I thinking? It is awesome. And Jimmy did a fantastic job doing it, which is why I love playing it and still play it to this day, because I asked him to do it, and he very politely said, I got you, fam. And he took care of it. And that's what I've got to work with. So, hello and welcome to the War Room. This is day 219. We're fastly approaching 3/4 of a year. And we're trying the theme thing with the show, the format. So, the way I've arranged the show lately is I'm going to make it centric around a question. And then we pass it around the room and see what each other thinks. And I will provide you stories to either support or deny what's going on with my question, whether or not I believe it or not, again, essentially. So we've got a lot of stories today. 22 to be in fact. So sit down, get a drink, buckle up. It's going to be a long ride. I'll try to keep my week in review personals limited. Girlfriend, okay. Job might have had an oopsie. Might have cost my boss $1,800. Honest mistake. He understands. We're fine. Somebody is messing with my car. I have 3 leaking tires now. 3. First it was just the ones on the driver's side. Now one of the back ones on the passenger side. Somebody's fucking with my car. So this morning I got up and I checked the tires, and one of them was a bit low, so I filled it up and didn't even think about checking the coolant because I have a leak that I can't find, despite the fact that I changed almost the entire cooling system in the car. Tomorrow is the day that I make the final payment on the car. I've got 3 leaking tires and a coolant leak. It's like it just doesn't want to live, and it's pissing me off because it's a very charming car. So anyway, I was driving to work this morning, doing 60 on the tollway, and talking to my mentor. And all of a sudden, like a mile away from work, I hear this beeping noise. And I know exactly what that noise is. It's the onboard computer warning me something's wrong. And I look down, and my temperature needle is right underneath the red mark in the hot. And I'm like, fuck me. Because I have to exit a freeway, cross 3 lanes of traffic, and drive an additional mile to my shop. It's an aluminum engine. A new one's $20,000. And it's only got 70,000 miles on it. So I'm pedaling it very gently and I started noticing that the engine speed is just tanking. Like, it drops down to 1200 RPM and it doesn't want to do any more than that. And I thought, oh God, I ruined it. It's starting to bind up because it's overheating. And then I thought maybe I blew a head gasket and maybe the coolant's in the oil. Maybe that's washing out the bearings and it's about to lock up on me and ruin my life. The only way I knew that that wasn't possible was I said, I guess I'll know when I make this right turn and I have to stop, or practically stop, because that, makes the engine slow down, and then just as you turn the corner, you're probably barely at idle, right? Well, I turn the corner, and it sits at 700 RPM, and it stays there, and I'm like, that's encouraging. And then I just kind of toe the pedal, and it bumps itself up to 1200, and it hits a wall and just stops again. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? So I'm not trying to poke the bear. I want it to get to my shop. I can see my shop at the end of the street. And I'm just like, tow it and just let it do whatever it's going to do until it gets to the parking lot. And I make it, and I put it in park, and it's still idling just fine. And I'm like, huh. But the needle is still just before hitting the red mark. And I'm like, that's weird. It didn't sky past it. It stopped short. So I keyed off, and I thought, well, I'm just going to leave it all day, let it cool down on its own. If it's seized, it's seized. There's nothing I can do. If it's a head gasket, I'll pull the dipstick before I check anything else, and we'll see. And then I thought, I wonder if this car's onboard computer has a limp mode. So I went online and I started Google Foo, and there's not much information on a 2003 Thunderbird. Funny enough, a lot of the how-to things are my own videos, which means I'm the one writing the stories. But this one, there's really no answer. So because my car shares a platform with the Jag S-Type and the Lincoln LS, I start cross-pollinating. And I start looking around, and I said, does the onboard computer, does the Ford/Jag onboard computer have a limp mode if the engine's overheating? And sure as shit, someone says, yes, it absolutely does. It cuts the RPM down to 1200, it pulls all the timing, and it cuts all the fuel pressure from the injectors to keep you from killing itself. And they were like, the worst thing you could do is floor it and try to bypass it. Just go with it until you get to where you need to go. It'll try to save itself the entire time. And I was like, oh, that's a relief. So anyway, at the end of my day, I fill 3 gallons. I have 3-gallon bottles of coolant and filled them, cracked open the bleeder, cracked open the 2 fillers, dumped 2 gallons of water in it. And my coworker's sitting there going, I think it's leaking out of the back of the engine somewhere. It's dripping. And I'm like, it could just be overflow, spillage. And I was like, I better just go home, go straight home just to be on the safe side. And as I was filling the water, I could see coolant still in the system because it was swirling with the water I was putting in there. So I was like, okay, it wasn't completely bone dry. And drove it all the way home. Windows cracked down. It was only like 80 degrees outside, so I can drive with the windows down. No AC on. Made it all the way home, just fine. It was weird. Everybody in front of me was some asshole that wanted to do 5 fucking miles an hour the whole way home. I was livid. I was like P226 nut levels of pissed off the whole way home. Some of you know what that joke means. Some of you get that reference. I was that pissed. But kept my cool because the needle stayed right where it was supposed to. Never overheated. When I pulled up to my driveway, I even flipped the air conditioner on just to make sure that the electric fans kick on. They did. Let it idle for like 5 minutes, keyed off, looked underneath the car, not a fucking drop. I keep telling people, my car is possessed. It's voodoo. Like, it's anorexic. It wants to vomit coolant whenever it feels like, but it's not consistent. Didn't lose a drop. Went back outside with a flashlight, checked underneath the car now, perfectly fine. Opened up the coolant reservoirs, still full. what the fuck is going on? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I can't find the leak anywhere, but it's leaking somewhere. Car made it home. I got to tear it apart tomorrow and look for a leak that only shows up when you're not looking. I don't get it. But it's safe. No oil in the coolant, no coolant in the oil. So head gaskets survived. That's a big deal when you have an aluminum 4-cam V8. Like, that's a Jag motor. There's Jag written all over that car underneath the skin. Controller arms, brakes, engine, it's all Jag. And I've had a few of those in my lifetime. And to truth be told, anything past 1994, they're all good. Even Jags, they're all good. 86, my first 86, it was shit. It was crap. It was really pretty looking, but it was a mechanical piece of hot garbage. You get a warped head? Jesus, that sucks. I don't know what mine is. It's got electric solenoids for coolant diverter valves or some shit, and I'm thinking maybe one of those is faulty, and when it kicks on, it pushes coolant down a hose that springs a leak. I don't know. I already got the diverter valve. I bought it as a precaution because the original one's 20 years old, so I'm changing that out tomorrow. It's just, what a coincidence. The day before I pay it off, right? I keep telling everybody, no, I'm not trading this car in. I really like it. I'm keeping it, but I'm going to buy my next truck and keep this car because it's a heritage vehicle. And it's doing everything in its power to make me change my mind and say, get out of my fucking life. But it made it home. I got to admit, the AJ, it's called an AJ35. That's the engine. It's a V8. It's a 4-liter. It's a good motor. It really is. Like, the motor itself is incredible. Doesn't make gobs of power. It makes just a little under 300. But for 4-liter. And it's smooth. It's quiet. It has really good torque for most of its power band. And I've overheated it twice, and it's still okay. So, lucky. Anyway, let me get my co-hosts in here. I have one, Mikhail Naitstretsky. And I have one, Jaime Zaporozhizhia. But he might be AFK. I just figured I would... Huh?
Me and him were everyone.
Oh, he's back. Okay, good. Cool. Awesome. All right, so you're all here. That's great. And good evening to all of you in the chat. So I have Shady Hill, Terry Scherer, New York Outcast. I have the bearded guy. Ooh. So
That
we're all
bearded
here.
guy.
That bearded guy. That's right. That bearded guy. Still got to explain why you changed your name, but it's okay.
YouTube.
Oh, they forced him to.
They forced him to.
Lame. So you should have changed your name to Free Beard Rides. So anyway, like I was saying in the intro, I don't know if you guys were watching it on the YouTube side, but we have 22 stories for you today, and the theme for today's show is the writing on the wall? Russian men are fleeing the country to closed border nations to avoid conscriptions, leading to mass surrenders and defections. There are more nuclear threats. There was a sham referendum of annexation of territory. More atrocities have been unveiled as over 1,100 bodies were found in a mass burn pit outside of Izium. That was today, I think. Yesterday or today's news. Plus, the sabotage of the Nordstream pipeline in the Baltic Sea, which is what the thumbnail for today's video is.
I heard about that. What's going on with that?
It gets better. That's not the only one. There's 4 of those now.
You're kidding me.
Nope. It's one of the last stories I've got. It's pretty amazing. There's 4 of them now. The Kraken farts is what those are, right? Because
Right?
nobody else seems to know what the hell's going on.
No, they don't.
So the question I'm having to ask is the writing on the wall? And what will happen first? Will Russia admit defeat? Or will they have to endure an Eastern European winter?
Well,
because you know how bad those are.
have you heard what some of the Russian conscripts are doing right now?
surrendering as soon as they cross the border.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's like,
that's what I was
what's
saying.
up?
Mass defections and surrenders.
Yeah.
I've got some stories today about what Putin's response to that is. You're gonna love
Well,
that.
I've even heard that that the those that opposed the war at the beginning,
Yeah.
they're getting louder and louder over there in Russia. The opposition on the war is getting ridiculous.
Yes. And we're gonna cover all that. Like
I
we've
know.
got that. I've got you.
I
covered.
know. We're just giving them. We're teasing them right now.
I know. But it's 22 stories. I can't tease them because half of them will fall asleep about story 12.
Well,
Anyway.
we got to keep them interested.
True. So should I put up that picture of Donna D'Erico in her two-piece bikini at age 55? That'll keep that. That might make them pass out from the blood loss.
That'll keep HVS alive at least.
That is a good-looking woman. Anyway, with her natural hair color too. Oof. Anyway, if you guys want to see who that is or what I'm talking about, meme vomit and tech shenanigans in my Discord server. Just click and take a look. Bring a sock. Or tissue. Something. I don't know. Oh, wow. John Brown finally made it to my panel. Or my audience. Good evening, sir. Yeah.
Well, this is the rare occasion where he's awake this evening. Normally he goes to bed early.
That's what Tony always uses as an excuse.
Well,
John
Brown
said something
is also a grandfather.
He said something kind of sweet today. I don't know if you know, but the New Watch podcast ran really long today. Like, really long. And
if I wasn't going through a hurricane, I would have jumped in.
It was very interesting. But Tony was like, yeah, I really wish, they could go back to doing the weekend review after Caliber Corner because he would like to join that because he's already awake. And I wanted to reply, but I couldn't get to my phone in time because my response would have been, well, if you want that show to come back, end the war in Ukraine. And then I can go back to doing that because I would much rather do that.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. You know that.
Well, he can do it. He's got 44 Magnums. He's got enough 22 LR to, like, mow down a division. Probably. Allegedly. Anyway. Should I talk about the thing that we were talking about earlier today about mental health and everything just as a PSA, or should we just go straight into the stories?
Whatever you want to do.
It kind of bothers me.
Well, then, you know what? Go over it, and then we'll get into stories.
Okay. I'm going to not name names to protect their identities. I'm going to beat around the bush a little bit, but I'm sure most of you who knows who I'm talking about. There's an individual out there right now. Their behavior in the last 48 hours is exactly the very thing that red flag laws were invented for. And I hate to say that because of the people who invented the concept of red flag laws and their desire to abuse the criteria of red flag laws, we as people in the gun community have to oppose it. But if it was just as it was intended, this person is what that red flag law was absolutely written for. I mean, this person is categorically gone. That person needs to be detained and monitored and counseled heavily, maybe even sedated. Mm-hmm. Some of you know who that is. I'm not going to say names because I'm not invested in this one way or another. It was just brought to my attention. I watched a string of videos, and I got to tell you, I read the Buffalo Shooter's 127-page manifesto. That guy seems normal compared to this person. Because that guy's manifesto was 117 pages of just gear review. Pretty decently written gear review, too, mind you. His political manifesto part, whatever. Everyone's got their motivations. The guy was obviously criminally bonkers. But anyway, the point is it got to the point where I was actually fearing for other people's safety. And we had a discussion in that Discord amongst people with band powers And I was like, the only reason I'm even talking about this is because this has tripped my inner psychologist. Because this is exactly what I was degreed in. That with a criminal pathology background. And I'm
Didn't
just
you
like,
also didn't you also do some time in the hospital too, as far as
yes, because
intern?
I had to do residency. It's everyone going through a master's and PhD program goes through residency. So for that, so yeah, I saw that too. But this person needs help, and I hope someone who is a better friend to them than others will maybe reach out to them to the point where they calm down and seek help, because it is scary, like how off the handle things are right now. Anyway, just I'm just saying. I'm just saying, like, it bugged me. It didn't bug me as much as Queen Elizabeth's death, but it bugged me all the same. No, red flags are not for any of you guys. You guys are all fine. It's funny enough, when we were discussing that in the Discord today, uh, I thought, like, someone jokingly said, I bet you profiled all of us. And I said, yes.
Yes,
Sort of.
you said yes, but you're all normal except for maybe this one.
No, you guys are all normal. Like, you guys are more than normal. You're fine. You're all fine, really. In hospital as patient or staff? I was in hospital as staff. Matter of fact,
Yeah,
when I did
mentioned
my
you
residency,
need an intern. So
yes,
when you intern, in medical school, you have to intern for a number of what years before you can
10,000
become a
hours.
medical doctor. Yeah.
That could take years. I volunteered for the ME's office in the mortuary because nobody does that, first of all. And second of all, because nobody does that, they give you double hours credit. So, of course I did that. I've seen some shit. I've seen some things. Anyway, I did eat a ham sandwich on a cadaver, off of a cadaver, because that's what the guy I worked under did to try to he did that to try to freak me out. And it didn't work. Like, I saw that in a movie or something before, and he did that, and I was like, you gonna finish that? And he just looks at me, he's like, well, shit, that didn't work. And then about 6 months in, we got another person who didn't volunteer. They were sort of forced into
Very
it,
short. Yeah.
and
It
they
happens a
brought
lot.
him in, and I was the guy standing there. And I was like, oh, you must be the new guy. He's like, yeah. And I was getting ready to reach out with my right hand, and I was like, oh, and I took my sandwich and I put it on the guy's chest. And then I wiped my hand on my bib, and I reached over to shake his hand, and the guy turned so green. It's fucking hilarious. And then, like, the guy I worked under, he was like, we got one. I was like, yeah, we got one. Anyway. Yeah, but yeah, that was 10,000 hours. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's go ahead and get into the stories. That was part of the week also, and I just, it bugged me. Like, I really hope that person finds peace, or at least help, or both, because I hate to say this, but we have a pool going. We sort of have a pool going. I'm not going to disclose what it's about, but I'm pretty sure most of you know what I mean. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the stories. This week we're covering days 213 to 219. So the week from Saturday of last week till today. So we're going to start with Saturday, September 24th, day 213. And our first story comes to you out of Finland, of all places. And this is a picture of their border crossing. So, Finland on Friday said it would significantly restrict the number of Russian tourists it will permit to cross its borders as an exodus of Russian men attempt to flee and avoid conscription. Finnish government said its decision was made over concerns that issuing swaths of visas to Russian men would cause serious damage to Finland's international position. That's kind of true.
So just deny them entry.
Exactly. Few details were released on the restrictions that Helsinki will now enforce, though its decision comes after other neighboring nations took steps earlier in the week to block Russian tourism from crossing into their borders. That's not tourism, that's just fleeing for their lives. Finland's latest decision has meant that all land border crossings connecting Russia to Europe have now effectively been blocked. The move comes as thousands of Russian men have reportedly begun fleeing the country en masse following Russian President Vladimir Putin's decree earlier in the week calling for a partial mobilization to funnel more men into the war in Ukraine, or, as I like to put it, pushing more meat into the grinder. Putin says he would be mobilizing reservists, which suggested anybody of conscription age would be forced to fight in Ukraine. Russian men ages 18 to 27 are required to serve in Russia's ranks for at least 1 year, though certain conditions like higher education and health could help male populations skirt that requirement. Some 300,000 men were expected to be mobilized to fight in Ukraine, where Russian troops have allegedly seen significant losses, though Moscow said Friday that tech, business, and state journalists will all be exempt. HVS, yes, Finland has a border. It's over 900 miles long against Russia's border. Kyiv has claimed that while over 9,000 of its troops have perished in the fighting, nearly 55,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. The scroller has been updated, by the way. And yes, the numbers between last week and this week for soldiers being KIA, it's pretty substantial. And jets, and artillery, and tanks. They've got to be coming down to T-43 soon. Death tolls throughout the war have obviously not been independently verified. But images depicting airports packed with fighting-age men and thousands causing traffic jams at border crossings suggest Russian citizens are unwilling to risk the statistics of fighting in Ukraine. You mean, I think it's more like they're unwilling to risk becoming a statistic while fighting in Ukraine. But that's just me. Is Ukraine winning still? By all accounts, in terms of reclamation of lost territory, yes. But we have a set of stories that's going to try to convince you otherwise, that Russia is prematurely claiming diplomatic victory in the sense that they annexed territories of the country of Ukraine because they said that the referendum vote that they put forward passed with overwhelming majority. Nobody in the world believes that. Like this is the only election that's even more illegitimate than our last presidential election in terms of I call bullshit. That phrase. I'm not saying me personally. Anyway, moving on. Unless you guys want to elaborate on this.
No, go.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. So, moving on. Same day. So, we're still on Saturday. And this one is called Sabotage. Western defense officials said Saturday that Russian forces are now attempting to try to slow Ukrainian troops advancing south from the Kharkiv region by targeting dams and forcing flooding at its crossing points. The United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense, who's actually a very good source of on-the-ground information. Like, they must have spies or something there, because most of their reports are really accurate. Confirmed reports this week that Russia's attacks on September 21st and 22nd relied on short-range ballistic missiles or similar weapons to hit the Pwnery Dam, which sits on the Seversky Donets River, where Ukrainian forces are advancing. The attacks followed a similar September 15th strike in central Ukraine on the Karachunivske Dam, hey, that's pretty easy, near Kryvyi Rih, Ukrainian President Zelensky's hometown. The Defense Ministry said this in its daily intelligence update. As Russian commanders become increasingly concerned about their operational setbacks, they are probably attempting to strike the sluice gates of dams in order to flood Ukrainian military crossing points, the statement read. But the ministry on Saturday assessed that Russia's attacks are unlikely to have caused significant disruption to Ukrainian operations due to the distance between the damaged dams and the combat zones. The attacks on civilian infrastructure come as Ukrainian forces have pushed forward not only in Kharkiv in the north, but in Kherson in the south. Russian forces have allegedly taken heavy losses, with 9 to 10 Russian soldiers dying for each Ukrainian soldier that are claimed to have been lost in Kharkiv this month. Ukraine's defense ministry has reported that nearly 55,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, while only some 9,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died since the war began over 7 months ago. Although nobody has been able to independently verify these statistics because people are, hurrying the bodies along or getting rid of them or burying them. Russian President Vladimir Putin has shown no sign of accepting defeat or ending the war by withdrawing his forces, and instead this week called for a partial mobilization to send another 300,000 troops to fight in Ukraine. That's all I got for that story. Let's see. HVS says Russia has troops trying to stop Ukrainian troops going north, and also other troops trying to stop moving going south. East and west seems okay. Well, no. See, the thing is the Ukrainians are coming from the west, and they're trying to clamp down like a set of jaws. So they came in from the west, and they're doing an end around from the north and the south because they're trying to take two territories at once and then meet in the middle. It's like a reverse Battle of the Bulge, I guess. And then the Russians are obviously in the east, but they're trying to do tactical retreats while destroying infrastructure and crossings on their way out to try to slow down the advance because they don't want this smoke. I guess that's the best way to put it. Moving on. Same day, still on Saturday. And I gotta tell you, man, you're gonna laugh when you see this picture because I swear to God, I thought it was like, remember the old dancing baby meme? Had like a big head, and it was like doing that, like it had his hand up in the air. It was like, I can't stop this feeling dance or whatever. This guy kind of reminds me of a cross between that and Mini-Me, Vern Troyer. Anyway, here he is. Look at those stubby little arms and that giant head. Russia has reportedly replaced one of its top logistical generals following several setbacks in its invasion of Ukraine that began back in February. Army General Dmitry Bulgakov, 67, was relieved of his post and replaced by 60-year-old Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev. Sorry.
I think you meant Nitstrexky.
No, this is a very fucked up Cyrillic. It's Mizintsev. Mizintsev. Yeah. Mikhail Mizintsev.
Oh, he might be from one of the stands.
Look, I just know he's got stubby little girly arms and a giant head, and he looks like a mini-me. Yeah. Anyway, on Saturday, adding that it is not clear what position Bulgakov has been reassigned to. Mizintsev is known in the region as the Butcher of Mariupol due to his role in capturing the Ukrainian town earlier this year. If you remember, that's where they found a mass grave with over 450 bodies. Civilians, hands tied behind their back, some executed, shot in the back of the head. This is the guy responsible. The move comes as a successful counteroffensive by Ukrainian troops has pushed back Russian forces into the northeastern region of Kharkiv. Russian President Putin announced in a 7-minute address this week that he was launching a partial mobilization of his new troops by conscripting all reservists and able-bodied veterans to the fight. Citizens who are currently in the reserve will be subject to conscription, he said early Wednesday, and above all, those who served in the armed forces have a certain military specialty and relevant experience. Good evening, Bjorn. According to one top official in Ukraine's defense ministry, Russia saw high personnel losses during the counteroffensive, losing 9 to 10 Russian soldiers for every 1 Ukrainian. Remember, there's going to be some overlap between stories. Though death tolls throughout the war have never been independently verified. Western defense officials said that the retreat signified Russia's inability to not only rearm its forces, but to add men back into the ranks, or as I like to say, suggesting that there was a breakdown in command and control in Russia's ranks as it withdrew from Kharkiv, prompting its soldiers to abandon not only military equipment, but sometimes divisions of their own troops.
They lost their Kharkivs and Kharkiv.
They lost their Kharkivs. But Western officials have said that it is too early to say if Ukraine's ability to recapture some 3,300 square miles is a turning point, or whether Russia has another operational ploy up its weathered sleeve. I can't look at that guy without thinking like he's 4'6" with just a giant head, and he was probably like, "Hey, look at me!" Anyway, the guy who wore the funny helmet and the braces, and they were like, "Don't let him run into things. He's got a very soft head."
Right.
Anyway, sorry. I got to get rid of him, otherwise I'll just keep laughing at him. I mean, he did butcher an entire town, so he's obviously evil. But he looks stupid doing it.
Most of them
HVS
do.
says, I survived several gun channels lobby chats. Does this make me a veteran? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to Sunday. We're getting through these pretty quick. Day 214. This story is titled Sham Vote. There it is. Russian President Vladimir Putin is aware he's, quote, losing this war against Ukraine and is forcing an annexation referendum vote to score what people call a political victory with the Russian people. This came according to retired four-star General Army Jack Keane. Sorry, I didn't read that right. Retired four-star Army General Jack Keane. I happen to like him. He's got to conclude that, at least right now, he's losing this war, and this is an attempt to obtain a political victory largely for his own domestic audience, that they have gobbled up in this increased terrain in 4 different regions in Ukraine. Let's see. This was a forced annexation ballot, by the way. Occupying forces in the Ukrainian regions of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson began voting last week on whether Ukrainians in the areas will decide to secede from Ukraine and join Russia. The referendums have been described as a sham by all Western nations, and Ukrainian officials on the ground described armed Russian forces are coercing residents to vote. The voting began Friday at residents' homes and will continue until Tuesday, when polling stations open, according to Russian media. His domestic audience has moved to Finland. No, they're stuck right at the border because the Finnish are like GTFO. Like, they just need to bring like a division of Simo Hayas and just say, "You shall not pass," all Gandalf-like, and
You
slam
shall
their
not pass.
Yeah, they should slam their M28 Mosin Nagant rifles into the ground like a staff and go, "You shall not pass." And if they keep coming, then they point the guns at those people and say, "Are you sure your life is worth crossing this border?" Anyway. Let's see. Keane says that anybody looking at this knows it's a sham. It's not going to mean anything, and it's certainly not going to keep Ukrainians from continuing their military operations inside these territories, he continued. Funny enough, sidebar, I watch a channel called The Grim Reapers, and they started off as a bunch of enthusiasts that try to play DCS, Digital Combat Simulator, and a couple of other games like IL-2 and I can't remember what the other one is right offhand. But they do a lot of flight sims, and they take their hardware for the flight sims incredibly seriously, and as they have grown over the years, they have increased their ranks with actual combat veteran pilots from all over the world. So like they have this coalition of multinational guys that are all friends, and it reminds me of Captain America, the first Avenger, when he had all those multinational guys in World War II together. Like that's what that comes off like that to me.
Oh, you mean his squad?
Yeah, and it felt like that to me with Grim Reapers. I watched a video yesterday. It was a previously recorded thing from months before. But this whole, it's not going to mean anything. It's certainly not going to stop Ukrainians from continuing their military operations inside these territories. There was a video I saw yesterday that actually happened, that a British destroyer was shelled by a Russian destroyer and several Russian aircraft as they were crossing Crimea right after they annexed that back in 2014. So like this whole it's not going to stop Ukrainians from continuing their military operations inside the territories, you're going to see another instance of this very soon. Because, like, the British got shelled by Russians that were crossing into Crimea because back then, nobody recognized the annexation of Crimea either. So when the British were going by Crimea and the Russians say, you're in our territorial waters, the British were like, fuck off. You don't own that shit. We don't recognize that. Kiss our ass. So they started getting shelled at. So yeah, it's going to happen again. But now it's going to happen in 4 more provinces that have been, quote, annexed. End sidebar. Let's see. Putin threatened the use of nuclear weapons last week as the country's invasion and war against Ukraine continues raging. To those who allow themselves such statements regarding Russia, I want to remind you that our country also has various means of destruction, and for separate components and more modern than those of NATO countries. And when the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, to protect Russia and our people, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal, Putin said in his Wednesday address. Yes, HVS, they do. It has been decimated by, what did they call it? Austerity? Something like that? Brexit and austerity and all this other crap. They've been decimated. Like, I think one of their carriers actually broke down. And the other one is, I think, in New York Harbor right now. They said it's a goodwill tour. I think it's more like a goodwill, we're going to refit your aircraft carrier and make you a badass so you can go back and, you know, clap some rooskies. Anyway, I don't know. Just postulating here.
Clap some rooskies. I like that.
Yeah. It's not a bluff, he added. Keane said that such a threat should be taken seriously, but that the probability is still pretty low. He argued that Russia's military isn't equipped to battle in a radioactive environment and that Ukrainian forces have been braced for a nuclear attack and remain steadfast in their fight. So, I'm going to disagree with General Jack Keane in one point here. The Russian military isn't equipped to battle in a radioactive environment. Putin doesn't give a shit about the value of human life. He will nuke what he has to nuke regardless of if his soldiers are there or not. Because he doesn't care. He's like, I've got a nation of 27 million people, or however many. I can conscript them all if I need to. Shit like that. He doesn't care about human life.
Yes, das Vidanya.
Let's assume that he's serious and that the use of a nuclear weapon is actually on the table, which I think is probably very low. Here's the factors that Putin has to consider. He would use a nuclear weapon to want to end the war, and that's not going to happen. The Ukrainians, the people, as well as their military, are steadfast. They openly talk about the possibility of a nuclear weapon being targeted against them, and they're going to fight, and they're going to continue to fight, he says. The second thing is his army is on the battlefield. They're not trained to deal with a radioactive nuclear battlefield. The Soviet Union was. They were equipped. They were properly trained. These guys are barely trained to even fight a conventional fight, much less deal with an environment like that. That's a pretty heavy insult. I believe that the Biden administration has reported that they're talking to Putin and his surrogates about the consequences here, and I hope that they were very direct with him about what those consequences would mean, he added. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the Soviet Union had more money than the Russian Federation does these days, so... yeah. They were better equipped.
Putin and his merry band of oligarchs have more money than the Soviet Union had.
Now
Seriously.
they do, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but the problem is, if they actually spent their money on their military like every other nation in the world, they'd actually have a better turnover. But taking bribes and taking money out of government programs and away from the government and military, you get an army like this.
They were taking the money and putting it in their own pockets.
Exactly.
Sounds a lot like politics as usual in this country.
Yeah, but at least we focus on the good parts. That's why our weapons are winning against the Russian weapons.
And that's the problem, you see. This whole war, the only reason that it hasn't ended yet is because the West doesn't want it to. You see,
it's not the West doesn't want it to end. It's just we don't want the Russians to win.
No, I disagree. They don't want it to end because this is one gigantic beta test for all of our nuclear all of our warfare hardware. Think about it. We said we're not going to give the Ukrainians the means to strike further with artillery than the HIMARS system, right? Because we already know the longer range stuff works. We don't want to give it to them because we already know it works. Some of the munitions used in the HIMARS systems are slightly new, and we want to see how effective it is. The Sling Blade drone was invented very hastily and then given to the Ukrainians because we wanted to see how effective it is. And based on their reports, we can tweak the recipe and make it better. We're beta testing our hardware. We've been accused of that. The whole world is accusing the rest of the world. You know, they're all pointing fingers saying, well, yeah, the Germans sent Panzerhaubitze 2000s and you guys sent Sling Blades and these guys sent this and that. It's all beta test. That's why they don't want it to end. This could have ended before it even began. Put this in your pipe and smoke it. For a year, the Ukrainians and Zelensky begged NATO to do something because he saw the Russians amassing around his country, right? NATO did nothing. Then he turns around and he says, make my country a no-fly zone to keep them out. NATO did nothing. There was a 47-mile long convoy in the beginning of this that got stuck and just sat there, right? All that equipment, all those men, all the bullets, the beans, and the antibiotics were just sitting there, doing nothing. If there was a no-fly zone and that column was sitting there, the highway of death would have been a joke in comparison to what the A-10s could have done to that column. It would have been comically hilarious, but a devastating tactical defeat to Russia. It could have ended right there. Didn't do it. Why? Didn't want to do it. Then we used really shitty, lame excuses like, well, we can't do that because that would be a provocation to Russia, and they would upset them. They'd be mad. Let me fill you in on something, okay? If you have a no-fly zone, you're putting planes in the air, and you're interdicting. You're saying, you shall not pass. You're not shooting anybody. You're not offending them. But when you send them ammunition and HIMARS systems and guns and grenades and they're killing Russians with it, how is that any different? That's more offensive because you're giving them offensive weapons in the name of being defensive, yes. But giving them MiG-29s from Poland to go attack Russians is really no different than us giving them HIMARS systems and attacking Russians. It's the same thing. The dead can't be offended. But the survivors, goddamn well, they will be. Anyway. HVS says, if I was president, I would challenge Russia to a dance contest. Winner take all. So much cheaper. You see, you lack vision. Check this out. If I could, I would go out there and meet Rommel one-on-one on the field of battle. Him and his tank, me and mine. We'd come out, we'd shake hands, we'd suit up like gentlemen, and we'd settle the outcome of the war like two old warriors, one-on-one. Patton. That's a challenge. Now you can try to do like, I don't know. I wouldn't try to arm wrestle a guy who rode a bear or a horse. Or maybe that was a pony or a donkey. I don't know. Challenge him to something other than a dance contest. Moving on. Same day. And we're going to go to arrests. Dun, dun, dun. Why do they always pick like these ugly Slav sexless cows in these pictures of Russian protesters getting arrested.
Because those are the only ones protesting right now.
Really? So it's like, we are arresting Kerenskis.
Kerenskis, yes.
See what I did there?
Da.
All right. The strongly pro-Kremlin editor of Russia's state-run RT News channel expressed anger on Saturday that enlistment officers were sending call-up papers to the wrong men, as frustration about a military mobilization grew. Wednesday's announcement of Russia's first public mobilization since World War II to shore up its faltering Ukraine war has triggered a rush for the border. I thought the rush for the border was because the Mexican pizza was back at Taco Bell. Oh! Anyway, the arrests of over 1,000 protesters and unease in the wider population. It is also attracting criticism from the Kremlin's very own official supporters, something almost unheard of in Russia since the invasion began. It has been announced that privates can be recruited up into the age of 35. Summons are going out to 40-year-olds. The RT editor-in-chief, Margarita Simonyan, railed on her Telegram channel. They're infuriating people, as if on purpose, as if it was out of spite, as if they'd been sent by Kyiv. In another rare sign of turmoil, the Defense Ministry said that the Deputy Minister in charge of logistics, General Dmitry Bulgakov, had been replaced for transfer to another role with Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev. Okay, we talked about this earlier. A long-time army official. Mizintsev, under UK, European Union, and Australian sanctions, have been referred to by the EU as the Butcher of Mariupol for his role in orchestrating a siege of the Ukrainian port earlier in the war that killed thousands of civilians.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. Russia appears set to formally annex a swath of Ukrainian territory this week, according to Russia's main news agencies. This follows so-called referendums in 4 occupied regions of Ukraine that began on Friday. Kyiv and the West have denounced the votes as a sham and said outcomes in favor of annexations are already predetermined. Sure. So then there was a couple of updates to this main story. More than 740 arrests is what the subtitle was. For the mobilization effort, officials have said 300,000 troops are needed, with priority given to people with recent military experience and vital skills. The Kremlin denies reports by 2 foreign-based Russian news outlets that the real target is over 1 million. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has repeatedly urged Russians not to fight, said pro-Moscow authorities knew they were sending people to their deaths. Running away from this criminal mobilization is better than being maimed and then having to answer in court for having taken part in an aggressive war, he said in Russian in a video address on Saturday. Russia officially counts millions of former conscripts as reservists, most of the male population of fighting age. And Wednesday's decree announcing the partial mobilization gave no criteria for who would be called up. Reports have surfaced of men with no military experience or past draft age receiving call-up papers, adding to the outrage that has revived dormant and banned anti-war demonstrations. More than 1,300 protesters were arrested in 38 towns on Wednesday, and on Saturday evening, more than 740 were detained in over 30 towns and cities in St. Petersburg to Siberia, according to the independent monitoring group OVD Info. Reuters images from St. Petersburg showed police in helmets and riot gear pinning protesters to the ground and kicking one of them before carrying them off in vans. Uh-oh, that is not the kind of van life you want, comrade. Earlier, the head of the Kremlin Human Rights Council, Valery Fedyaev, announced that he had written to Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu with a request to urgently resolve problems. His Telegram posting criticized the way exemptions were being applied and listed cases of inappropriate enlistment, including nurses and midwives with zero military experience. Some recruiters hand over the call-up papers at 2 a.m. As if they think we're all draft dodgers, he says. Then it moved on to another, like, side story called cannon fodder. Yeah. On Friday, the Defense Ministry listed some sectors in which employers could nominate staff for exemptions. There has been a particular outcry among ethnic minorities in remote, poor areas in Siberia, where Russia's professional armed forces have long recruited disproportionately. Well, yeah. It's like, they walk in and they're like, quit thinking like a poor. At least we feed you. Bullets. Since
Bullets.
Wednesday, people have queued for hours to cross into Mongolia. Kazakhstan.
Mongolia?
Yeah, Mongolia. Kazakhstan, Finland, or Georgia. Scared Russia might close its borders, although Kremlin says reports of an exodus are exaggerated. Listen, if you've got Russians ducking down and hiding under long-haired yaks crossing into the Mongolian border, you've got a problem.
You've got a
bit of a problem. Let's see. Asked by reporters at the United Nations on Saturday why so many Russians were leaving, Foreign Minister Sergei Lapdog, remember him, pointed to the Right of Freedom movement. The governor of Buryatia, a region which adjoins Mongolia and is home to the ethnic Mongol minority, acknowledged some had wrongly received papers and said those without military experience or who had medical exemptions would be exempt. On Saturday, Tsakia, oh, I've never seen this name before. Tsakia Elbegdorj. Wow, that's a tough name. President of Mongolia until 2017 and now head of the... What the fuck? Now the head of the World Mongol Federation. That sounds like the NWO. Promised those fleeing the draft, especially three Russian Mongol groups, a warm welcome and bluntly called on Putin to end the war. The Buryat Mongols, Tuva Mongols, and Kalmyk Mongols have been used as nothing more than cannon fodder, he said in a video, wearing a ribbon in Ukrainian yellow and blue. Today you are fleeing brutality, cruelty, and ultimately a likely death. Tomorrow you will start freeing your country from dictatorship. The mobilization and the hasty organization of the votes in occupied territories came soon after a lightning Ukrainian offensive in the Kharkiv region this month, Moscow's sharpest reverse of the war. MWO, a new rap act. World Mongol Federation. Hell yeah! Unfortunately, Bushwick Bill is no longer with us and he can't help run it. Some of you will get that reference. All right. Next story. More arrests. So this was updated later in the day. Now there's more arrests. No, that guy is not planking. More than 2,300 Russians have been arrested in dozens of cities this week while protesting the conscription of 300,000 men for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which was announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday, according to the human rights group OVD Info. Some of those who were arrested were handed conscription papers. Could you imagine? I'm going to protest. They're going to slap cuffs on you and say, "Are you calm? Here's your papers." Let's see. Fyodor Orlov.
It's a whole new take on Papers, Please.
No shit. They arrest you and then give you the papers. It's like, you didn't have papers, you're under arrest. Here's your papers. Fyodor Orlov, a journalist, was arrested on Wednesday, then was handed a summons from the military enlistment office while in court. Another protester in Moscow was told that he would receive a 10-year prison sentence for refusing a summons to the military. Thousands of other Russians have fled the country in the wake of the mobilization order, prompting Finland to close its border. Some Eastern European countries, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Lithuania, shut down their borders on Monday shortly before the mobilization order. Let's see. Where am I? Russian men between the ages of 18 and 27 are required to serve 1 year in the military. That's actually pretty low. The Defense Ministry said that tech workers, bankers, and state journalists will be exempted from the latest mobilization order. Bankers. Why? Because they're desperately trying to keep the ruble from collapsing a second time? I wonder. Russian men between the ages of 18 and 27 are required. Oh, I already read that part. Sorry. The mobilization order comes as Putin seeks to replenish his forces in Ukraine more than 7 months into the war. Ukraine's defense ministry claims that Russia has lost at least 55,000 soldiers since the outset of the invasion. Occupied territories in Ukraine, such as Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, have held referendums on joining the Russian Federation this week, though many Western leaders have criticized the votes as sham elections. Sorry, there's overlap. You know that.
Well, they are sham elections, but that's besides the point.
Well, yeah, it's sort of like that old joke that there were only 2 channels on Russian state TV. One was the Russian state TV propaganda. 2 was a KGB agent sitting in front of a desk pointing a gun at the camera saying, "Turn back to channel 1." Same kind of thing. So, now we move on to Monday, September 26th, day 215, and this picture is titled Vladimir Puto, because I chose that name. Anyway, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed legislation that amends Russia's criminal code to impose a 10-year prison sentence on any service member who voluntarily surrenders to Ukrainian forces. This is classic Putin's playbook. He's a master of checkmates. This came from Rebecca Koffler. You've heard me say this name tons of times. Former Defense Intelligence Agency officer and author of Putin's playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. It's an impossible decision that Russian men face today. Either you die on the battlefield or you rot in prison. Putin's move comes after he announced a partial mobilization in Russia last week, including conscription to a conflict that has been ongoing for 7 months and has rarely gone according to the script for Moscow. Now, those drafted in the military service will face stiff penalties if they choose to abandon the fight in Ukraine. Russian troops who are first-time offenders are able to flee captivity and return to their unit will be exempt from the prison sentence. However, Koffler does not believe the move will solve the problems Russia has experienced on the battlefield, which have multiplied after a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive back in September. Not only this move will not solve the issues of Russia's decreasing combat power in Ukraine now, partial mobilization will not produce tangible results for months, but it will have a profound negative consequence for Russia and its military in the long run. Putin extended university and vocational college students as a draft deferment to pursue their studies in addition to the Criminal Code Amendment, though only students who are pursuing a secondary education for the first time will be eligible for the deferment. The order exempting students from the partial mobilization is retroactive to September 21st, the day Putin signed the mobilization order. However, many young Russian men will still be subject to the country's military draft, a move Koffler said would have disastrous consequences as the country battles a demographic crisis. Russia currently has a fertility rate of 1.5. Koffler pointed out, well below the replacement rate of the 2.1 that allows a country to maintain population levels. Eliminating an entire segment of males, 18 to 55-year-olds, child-producing ages, is strategically a disastrous move, she argued. It will have negative ripple effects not just on Russia's military, but on the future of Russian society. It's a tragedy for the Russian people. She's drawing back on a statistic from World War I, where somebody in the chat's probably going to have to clarify this, but I remember there was a statistic that I think it was France. Maybe it was France. The breeding age of males from 17 to like 50 were decimated in World War I, to the point that it created a population decline that took 2.5 generations to recover, because all the breeders died, essentially, right? if you only have a fertility rate of 1.5, you're not replacing the 2.1. You know, like you wife and you husband, wife, and 2.1 kids, that kind of thing. That statistic. If it's 1.5, you're on the decline. If you're sending everybody 18 to 55 to Russia to die, or Ukraine to die, then that means the only people that are going to be fucking are teenagers, and we all know how successful teenage pregnancies are and what a burden they are on the medical industry and government funds, and very old people who might have the children but can't raise them because they're too old or physically unable to do so. So now you have orphanages that are overrun. Brilliant. Keep up the good work, Russia. This is why you're about to become a second world nation again. Moving on.
No, they're about to become a third world nation.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well,
Not really.
I would.
The people of Russia won't allow that. Like, there's too many of them.
Yeah.
They will rebuild. Like, I hope I'm not wrong in saying this, but I really think that the only thing that can save Russia's reputation on a geopolitical scale is once this war ends, and once Putin is essentially at the end of a rope, Alexei Navalny is the only person who can save that country. He has to be, because he's the one that they keep trying to kill, which means they fear him. Why do they fear him? Because he obviously has a better idea. And that better idea bucks the status quo. Just a thought. Moving on. Next story is a short one. And yes, I morphed the picture. Oh, I see who's in the chat now. Hello. Anyway, yes, I modified this picture. Yes, that was a real movie. Some of you may remember it. In the army now. Yeah. Wait till you see what I did to the Wait till you see what I did to the picture. Edward Snowden. Remember that guy?
Yeah.
Could be drafted to fight in Russia's war in Ukraine after Putin granted the U.S. whistleblower full Russian citizenship, State Department spokesman Ned Price said on Monday. Our position has not changed. Mr. Snowden should return to the United States, where he should face justice as any other American citizen would, Price told reporters. Yeah, I don't think he's going to do that, bro. Perhaps the only thing that has changed is that as a result of his Russian citizenship, apparently now he may well be conscripted to fight in Russia's war in Ukraine. Snowden, 39, is facing espionage charges that could put him behind bars for up to 30 years in the U.S.
I mean, if the Russians really wanted him to work for them as far as the military, then yeah, he can join the cyber warfare division.
That's exactly what I was thinking earlier too. Yeah, like if he's good at espionage and like electronic warfare, then that's where he would be best served. Clearly, there's an abstraction if I ever saw it. Sorry. Let's see. Where am I? The former National Security Agency contractor first exposed sweeping surveillance operations by the U.S. intelligence agencies in 2013, then fled to Russia, where he was eventually granted asylum. The revelations were met with praise from civil liberties activists, while other U.S. officials have accused him of damaging national security. Snowden said that he would apply for Russian citizenship in 2020 after being given permanent residency. His lawyer, Anatoly Kucherena, told the state-owned news outlet RIA Novosti that Snowden won't be conscripted because he doesn't have any experience in the Russian military. Didn't I just tell you a story about tens of thousands of people, especially near Mongolia, being conscripted with papers that had no military experience? Obviously, this lawyer's full of shit. Putin originally announced the partial mobilization to conscript over 300,000 Russian men last Wednesday to fight in Ukraine. The order has been met with protests in dozens of cities across Russia. A little bit of overlap, sorry. Moving on.
A lot of bit of overlap, honestly.
Well, yeah, because I do these on a timeline, and that's how I know that they blend into one another.
I was talking about the conscription and the in Snowden and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still like my face morph thing.
You would.
It was hard to get the colors to match. Anyway, moving on. Nukes. Yeah, nukes. Oh yeah. U.S. and Russia. U.S. and Russian officials have been in sporadic contact about nuclear issues. The Kremlin said Monday, one day after National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned of catastrophic consequences if Russia uses nuclear weapons. Huh. Sorry, I had a news flash hit my phone. Russian President Vladimir Putin said last week that his country's nuclear threats are not a bluff. I want to remind you that our country has various means of destruction. Sorry, that was a bad one. Putin said on Wednesday, when the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, to protect Russia and our people, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal. The threats have been condemned by top U.S. officials, with Sullivan saying on Sunday that the U.S. has communicated with Russia in private channels about the response America would take. If Russia crosses this line, there will be catastrophic consequences for Russia. The United States will respond decisively. Sullivan said this to NBC News on Sunday. Meet the press, I guess. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Monday that there are channels for dialogue that are very sporadic in nature, according to the Russian state-owned news outlet RIA Novosti. Ukrainian President Zelensky accused Putin of using the weapons as nuclear blackmail. Well, no shit. Maybe
nuclear
yesterday.
Blackmail. I love nuclear blackmail.
I guess. Wait, isn't that what War Machine is? Ba-dum-ts. Sorry. Maybe yesterday it was a bluff, but now it could be a reality, Zelensky told the news on Sunday. I don't think he's bluffing anymore. He never was! Anyway. That joke went right over your head, didn't it?
I wasn't paying attention.
Nuclear blackmail. War Machine.
Yeah, an Iron Man joke.
See, it's not funny when I have to explain it. Anyway, it was terrible.
It was a terrible joke.
Dad jokes when I'm not a dad. Jesus. Dog jokes.
You could be, you just don't know it yet.
I have not touched her like that.
That's what you said.
Allegedly. She's in the chat. She'll tell you. Anyway. Moving on to Tuesday, before I embarrass myself further.
I don't think that's possible.
Trust me. I have... What is that saying in Tombstone? Nonsense. I've yet to fully defile myself. Anyway.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Moving on. Tuesday, September 27th. Day 216. This is not actually people fleeing. This is the Ukrainian military backfilling territory after the Russians have fled. I couldn't find a good picture of Russians running, so I posted pictures of the, quote, heroes instead. Tens of thousands of Russians have fled the country to Mongolia, Georgia, and Kazakhstan as military-aged men flee Russian President Putin's mobilization order. Putin ordered a partial mobilization earlier this month, drafting up to 300,000 reserve troops. The move has led to widespread fear of general conscription amid the country's invasion of Ukraine. Mongolia, Georgia, and Kazakhstan have borne the brunt of the migration wave, with Georgia stating that daily border crossings have nearly doubled in less than a week. It's Georgia. You had one cross yesterday, you had two cross today. That's double. I know it's more than that, though.
No, it's more... Well...
Maybe it's 1,000 to 2,000.
It depends on which way they're going, because it could have been a triple cross.
Ooh. Into Georgia. Out of Georgia. Into Ossetia. I don't know. You might be right. About 4 to 5 days ago, there were 5,000 to 6,000 visitors from Russia daily. And now it has increased to over 10,000. Georgia Interior Minister, oh boy, Vakhtang Gomilari. I don't think there's a Cyrillic for that name. Told reporters on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Russia's fleeing to Mongolia have had to wait in line more than a dozen hours long to be processed. The majority of those leaving were men, with some leaving behind their families. My country has started partial mobilization, and I think it's negatively affecting society. One Russian man who fled to Mongolia, I keep wanting to say Magnolia, Mongolia told Reuters, "We waited a very long time at the Russian side of the border, over 16 hours. There were a lot of young people, a lot of people trying to get away from Putin." Another man, who went by the name, quote, Alexei, told the outlet. He says he left behind his wife and 2 children and plans to return when the draft is passed. You fucking gutless coward. You should have took them with you. "We are not afraid, but why do we have to fight in Ukraine? Why?" he told Reuters. "If other countries would attack Russia, we would fight for our country, but why are we going to go fight in Ukraine? For what?" Putin ordered the military mobilization on September 21st, and since then, nearly 100,000 Russians have fled to Kazakhstan alone. The country is among the most convenient for Russians to flee to, as the Russian language is widely spoken there, and there's no need for a passport to travel across the border. It's like us going into Canada, I guess, huh? Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, not Tokarev, Tokayev, has refused to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and he vowed to care for those fleeing the country. A lot of people from Russia have come over in the last few days. Most of them were forced to leave by a desperate situation, he says in his Tuesday speech. "We must take care of them and ensure their safety. This is a political and humanitarian matter." You know what? He said that in the order that he meant it in, didn't he? It's a political matter first. It's a humanitarian one last. Now, sidebar. If I was Vladimir Putin, and I read this story, right, about how fighting-age men have left their wife and children behind to avoid conscription. If I was Putin, and I was desperate, and I wanted to make a statement, I would conscript their wives that were left behind. Because nothing will make a man run back home faster than the threat of his wife being taken. Right? Didn't even say what I was going to do to his kids yet, did I? I'll let you use your imagination with that one. He'll just conscript them into making bullets in slave-like conditions in sweatshops. If I was Putin, that's exactly what I would do. No, you're right, Bjorn. You do need a passport to go to Canada. You need a passport to cross into Mexico now, too. Once upon a time, when I was a wee lad, teenager, I went to a place called Sugar Lake. It's not the real name, but we call it Sugar Lake in Mexico. And you used to be able to go to the border and cross with just your driver's license. And you were allowed to stay, I think, for 72 hours. Or, I think it was 72 hours. It might have been longer. Maybe a week. Back then. Now you have to have a passport to go into Mexico, too. Anyway. Moving on. And I've got this picture. And yes, I did put the caption underneath the picture because when I read the story, I thought, what if that was their real aim? So anyway, here's the picture. The U.S. would welcome any Russian citizens seeking asylum in this country after fleeing President Putin's military draft. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said Tuesday. Now, I just want to stop the story right here. Because when I read that, I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, is she fucking stupid?
No more Russians.
Do you know what a Trojan horse operation looks like? Because you're about to allow it to happen. You are letting the wolves come in with the sheep, and you don't think that they're going to spy on us, you fucking retard? Anyway, Jean-Pierre made the comments during a White House press briefing, even as tens of thousands of Russian citizens have surged into neighboring Eastern European countries. A reporter pressed Jean-Pierre, I like saying her name, about reports of military-aged men fleeing across borders or even injuring themselves to avoid conscription. Didn't you tell me they were like shooting off their toe or something this week? Mike.
I don't know. It might have been something like that.
Somebody was telling me this week that fighting-age men were mutilating themselves to avoid draft.
Probably.
Anyway, I wouldn't doubt it.
I wouldn't either.
I know the White House is drawn. I mean, yeah. I mean, think about like freaking John Wick, right? They probably just cut off their left-hand ring finger or something. I don't know. That's what they did in John Wick, right?
They cut off his ring finger because
Your offhand ring finger, not your main hand.
no, the one his ring was on.
Right, but your ring goes on your offhand anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he's right-handed, so they cut the one on his left hand. Anyway.
Yeah.
Let's see. I know the White House has drawn a distinction between the Russian government and the people of Russia. Does the president have a message for these men who are desperately trying to flee the country? The reporter asked. We are seeing protests in the streets of Russia. We are seeing people sign petitions, and I think the message they're sending to us very clearly is that this war that Putin started is unpopular.
Wow.
Says, you don't say.
Wow, you just figured that one out on your own.
There are people out there in Russia who do not want to fight Putin's war or die for it. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious.
Yeah.
We believe that regardless of nationality, they may apply for asylum in the United States and have their claim adjudicated on a case-by-case basis, she added. Oh, you mean like you do at the border? Look how well that worked.
Yeah.
We welcome any folks who are seeking asylum, and they should do that. Putin ordered a partial mobilization of Russian military last week, drafting up to 300,000 reserve troops. The move has led to widespread fear of general conscription amid the country's invasion of Ukraine. Mongolia, Georgia, and Kazakhstan, here comes the overlap, have borne the brunt of the wave of Russian military-aged men leaving the country. Georgia officials stated that daily border crossings have doubled in less than a week. So that's all the overlap part. I'll save you the rest of it because I'm reading it ahead of myself and I can tell it's the same thing. Okay, listen. When you have a war and you are trying to get away from it and you are seeking asylum, most people are trying to get away from it, but they want to go home when it's over. So why would you displace them halfway around the world, you idiots? Like, why don't you just let them leave there and put them on Crete, on an island, so you can watch them? There's a thought.
Just answered your own question.
And it doesn't endanger the lives of your countrymen. Here in America. Anyway. Just a thought. Just saying. Moving on. And yes, I really think maybe this was Putin's idea of the greatest deportation scheme ever. Maybe he was getting rid of all the undesirables by threatening to draft them. I don't know. Then again, meat grinder, right?
Right.
Moving on. Baltic leak. You're going to notice I'm showing you pictures. They all sort of look the same. They might be the same. Maybe. Taken at different angles. Maybe. But then again, the type of damage is the same. So the type of visual is going to be the same when it bubbles out of the ocean. So we're going to get into that now. Seismic activity detected at the site of the Nordstream pipeline's gas leaks in the Baltic Sea was caused by explosions, not earthquakes, not landslides. This came from a Swedish seismologist on Tuesday. Bjorn. Hey, there's a Bjorn in chat. Are you Bjorn Lund? Director of the Swedish National Seismic Network, said he and his colleagues gathered seismic data showing that explosions took place in the water and not in the rock underneath the seabed. The explosions rattled the Baltic Sea before unusual leaks were discovered in the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines running underwater from Russia to Germany. Mike, didn't we talk about this today? That somebody was going to be listening and somebody was going to figure out what the hell's going on? Like I said, SOSIS. I think I was talking to Scott about that. Apparently, Swedish seismologists were listening, so this is how they came up with this. Lund said that the first explosion was recorded early Monday southeast of the Danish island of Bornholm. A second, stronger blast northeast of the island that night was equivalent to a magnitude 2.3 earthquake. Seismic situations in Denmark, Norway, and Finland are also seismic stations in Denmark, Norway, and Finland also registered the explosions. So yeah, they were all listening. There's no doubt this is not an earthquake, Lund said. Multiple European officials have pointed to possible sabotage amid an energy standoff with Russia provoked by the war in Ukraine. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said her government regarded the leaks as the results of deliberate actions by unknown perpetrators. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz, I wish I could say this guy's name because I know I'm not saying it right. It's spelled Morawiecki, but I know it's not pronounced that way, so my apologies. If someone knows how to pronounce that guy's name, write it in phonetics in the chat and I will use it properly. Meanwhile, called the events an act of sabotage, one that probably means the next step of escalation in the situation that we're dealing with in Ukraine. Slight sidebar here. It's the Baltic Sea, right? That means the Ukrainians can't be doing this. They have the Black Sea, not the Baltic Sea. They are nowhere near the Baltic Sea. So it's somebody else. It has to be somebody else. That's why I was saying, what if it was the Russians shitting in their own bed on purpose and then trying to point fingers at others? And somebody told me earlier today, why would they do that? Why would they get rid of their natural resource like that they could just be making money off of it? I'm like, because they're insane and they want to get, if I can't have it, then I'll just burn it. You know what I mean? Scorched earth. You don't want it? Fine. I'll just blow it up. Now you can't have it at all. Ever. That kind of thing. Anyway. Just a theory. But we don't know who's doing it. They're listening. They can hear the explosions. Now we need to go down there with like an ROV and look at the damage and see what it... Do you see evidence of a limpet mine? Do you see evidence of planted explosives or, I don't know, an ocean bomb or something? What's that saying in Jurassic Park? I've never met an animal that didn't leave any shit around. It's the same thing, right? Like, you're going to go down there, you're going to see the damage to this pipeline, you're going to find some evidence of what caused it. Just a thought. Let's see. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told reporters that American officials have not confirmed sabotage or an attack. Wow. So I guess that means we did it, because we're instantly denying everything. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines are filled with natural gas, but are not delivering the fuel to Europe, overshadowing the inauguration of a long-awaited pipeline that will bring Norwegian gas to Poland to bolster the continent's energy independence from Moscow. The gas leaks created a foamy white area, that sounds kind of dirty, on the water's surface. Images released by Denmark's military show. Right there. Danish Energy Minister Dan Jorgensen said that we cannot say how long the leak will go on as the gas has not been turned off. Still. Here comes the worst part. The worst part of this story, I left a caption next to it. The escaped natural gas is made up mostly of methane, the second biggest contributor to climate change after carbon dioxide. I was like, shut the fuck up! They had to bring fucking climate change into this shit. Anyway, no official presented evidence of what caused the Nord Stream problems, but with distrust of Russia running high, some feared Moscow sabotaged its own infrastructure out of spite. See? I wasn't the only one thinking this. To warn that the pipelines are vulnerable to attack. The extent of the damage means that the Nord Stream pipelines are unlikely to be able to carry any gas to Europe this winter, even if there was political will to bring them back online, analysts at the Eurasia Group says. Russia has halted flows on the 760-mile Nord Stream 1 pipeline during the war, while Germany prevented them from ever starting in the parallel Nord Stream 2. The Nord Stream pipelines have been at the center of an energy clash between Europe and Russia since the invasion of Ukraine in late February. Plunging Russian gas supplies have caused prices to soar, pressuring governments to help ease the pain of sky-high energy bills and households and businesses as the winter nears. Hence why I used that font today and why we said what's going to happen first, the Russian winter or surrender. The Baltic Pipe is a prominent element in the European Union's search for an energy security solution and is to start bringing Norwegian gas through Denmark and along the Baltic Sea to Poland on October 1st. Well, now it's not. Moving on. Unless you have something to add.
No, go for it.
Okay. Moving on. Wednesday, September 28th, day 217. And, coincidentally, we are halfway done. Means it's going to be a 3-hour show. Fuck. This story is called The Defensive. All right. Russian troops have been put on the defense in Luhansk as Ukrainian forces continue to advance, and Kyiv looks to retake occupied territory the Kremlin has held for months. Units are making slow advances on at least 2 axes east of the line of the Oksal and Seversky Donetsk rivers, where forces had consolidated following their previous advance earlier in the month. This came from the UK Defence Ministry, again, because they are very, very good with this information. That was in their Wednesday intelligence briefing, by the way. Defense officials said Russian troops are now mounting a more substantive defense than previously done, as Ukrainian forces have pushed the front lines out of Kharkiv as they advance on Luhansk. Luhansk, located in the northern Donbas region, remains a chief priority in Russian President Putin's war effort as he looks to illegally annex several regions across eastern and southern Ukraine. Trust me, I've got a map showing you this very shortly. Western officials in Kyiv have condemned the referenda as shams and warned the results would mimic steps Moscow took in Crimea when it reportedly falsified ballot results in favor of Russia's political aims back in 2014. Sound familiar? We talked about it earlier. The Kremlin has warned that it will intercept any attack in the war-torn regions as an attack on Russia should the referenda results show support in joining the Russian Federation. See what they're doing there? They set up a rigged election to make it seem like the people living there overwhelmingly wanted to become part of Russia. So that way, if anybody fights in the region, now they're saying it's an attack on mainland Russia. So if you were a Ukrainian soldier, you would call Zelensky and say, hey, they're accusing us of attacking the country of Russia now that they've annexed this stuff, right? And he would say, yes. And he says, well, then why don't we just march our ass straight to Moscow and take that fucker out? Now, if we're fighting in Russia, we might as well just keep going, right? I mean, that's kind of what they're insinuating. Anyway, let's see. Early tallying results released by Russian news outlets Tuesday allegedly showed that as many as 98% of voters support Russia's illegal annexation of Ukraine's territory. 98%. Right. 98% of what's left after everyone fled the area? Maybe. Anyway. However, Ukrainian President Zelensky said that he will not recognize the farce and that his troops will not stop until they've liberated all of Ukraine from Russian forces, including Crimea. Annexation is the kind of move that pits him alone against the whole of humanity, Zelensky said in his reference to Putin. Russia's recognition of these sham referenda as allegedly normal, implementation of the so-called Crimean scenario, are another attempt to annex the territory of Ukraine, he says. Zelensky called for a clear signal from the international community to show that Russia's attempts to seize Ukrainian land will not be acknowledged and said harsher sanctions need to be enforced. HVS says that because there's 50 Russian divisions that say you can't. Where are those divisions now if they can't even take a country as small as Ukraine? Where are those guys now? I mean, if they have to conscript 300,000 people, they don't have 50 divisions. And if they do, it's 50 divisions of conscripts. How good are they going to be? They're using T-54 tanks, for God's sakes. They're about to drop down to T-43s. They're running out. How many felons do they have, Mike?
A number of them.
I'm sorry. Let me rephrase the question. How many Sukhoi 57 felons do they have, Mike? 6.
About
6.
That.
4 of them are prototypes for systems, which means they're not even combat ready. 6.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. How many T-14 Armada tanks do they have? Supposedly 100. Less
Supposedly.
than a dozen are in operational condition, and even those aren't fully outfitted either, because they're
But those are protecting Moscow.
allegedly, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
What are they protecting Moscow from? The Ukrainians
Itself.
or their fellow Russians?
Probably the first one.
I think they're protecting them against their fellow Russians. But then again, the damn things break down so often. How protected can they do? How much protection can they offer the capital? Anyway, moving on. Next story is called. No, not that kind of felon HVS. I'm sorry. That was my fault. Su-57, Sukhoi 57, fifth generation combat aircraft. Not stealth, mind you, because its radar cross-section is pathetic. NATO designation is felon. That's what I meant when I asked. Moving on. This story is entitled Strange Bedfellows. Yeah. How you doing? Here we go. You're going to love this one, Mike. Russia and the Taliban are in agreement on a deal that would see Russian gas, diesel, and wheat flow into Afghanistan at a discounted rate.
Oh,
Listen,
that's not good.
didn't we give them a discount on like $30 billion of military hardware? How many more discounts do they need? Just saying. Where's my fucking MRAP? Anyway.
Where's my fucking Humvee?
MRAPs trump Humvees.
I want a Humvee, damn it.
I'll settle for an LMTV. Anyway.
I won't.
The deal will provide Russia with additional export earnings, undermining Washington's efforts to weaken the Russian economy. Hang on a second. Let me reread that. The deal will provide Russia with additional export earnings, undermining Washington's efforts to weaken the Russian economy. I'm sorry, when was Afghanistan an economic player on a geopolitical scale that could bail the Russians out? Are you fucking kidding me? Anyway.
I don't understand that one either, but again...
Just what? Anyway.
As I'm telling you, man, things are crazy.
It's retarded. Anyway. This is another example of the failed sanctions policy pursued by the Biden administration. The sanctions have not changed Putin's behavior in 9 years. They never will.
Nope.
Yeah, see, Bjorn said it. We gave military equipment away for nothing. You can't get a better discount than that. No shit. Hashtag where's my MRAP? Anyway. Okay, look. You can keep the MRAP. You can keep the Blackhawks. Just send me a set of like 4-tube nods. Oh. There it is. Sorry. I think I had a little network snafu for a second. Koffler's comments came after it was revealed that Russia will send Afghanistan 2 million tons of wheat, 1 million tons of gasoline and diesel, and 500,000 tons of liquefied petroleum gas annually at a discount compared to global commodity prices, according to a Reuters report Wednesday. The deal represents the first major international agreement the Taliban has struck since regaining power in Afghanistan last year, with most governments around the world refusing to offer to offer the group official recognition until the country improves its records on human rights. Russia does not officially recognize the Taliban government, but it is one of the few countries that kept its embassy in Kabul open after U.S. forces left, and Taliban forces swept across the country and retook its capital. Earlier this month, 2 Russian diplomats were killed in a suspected ISIS...
Hold up. You know the reason why they made that deal? Because Russia doesn't care about human rights either.
Correct. But it... How am I going to... I'm trying to figure out a way to word this question. How do you strike a deal with a nation of pores? What's the best way to describe it? Like, what deal can you strike with a nation of pores? The only thing I can think of is that the Russians want to grab some of that sweet military hardware we left behind and try to pull off another Tu-4. Reverse engineer whatever they get from us, or from them that we left behind. That's the only thing I can think of. Because they're broke. What do they got? We took 3.5 trillion tons of iron ore out of that country. We took like 300,000 tons of lithium out of that country. Ain't nothing left. We cored it like an apple. Anyway. Maybe I said the quiet part out loud just now. Anyway. Let's see. Earlier this month, 2 Russian diplomats were killed in a suspected ISIS suicide bomb attack aimed at its embassy in Kabul. The suicide bomber's device exploded outside the embassy's visa section. The Associated Press reported at the time there was no immediate reason given for the attack by the terror group. They do have some rare earth metals, yes, that's correct, but I think we mined them all. Just saying. There's more, I'm sure. The deal comes at a time of economic crisis for both countries, with Russia facing a limited market of buyers for its energy exports amid American and Western sanctions in response to the country's invasion of Ukraine. However, Koffler does not believe the agreement will have a significant impact on the Russian economy. Of course not, because you did a deal with pores. Anyway, the new deal with the Taliban by itself will not release the strains placed on the Russian economy by the U.S. and economic sanctions by the Europeans. Russia is in desperate need of high-tech parts, such as semiconductors, not raisins and she's insulting them. Not raisins and medicinal herbs promised by Taliban to Putin in exchange for oil, gas, and wheat. Could you imagine that deal? Okay, listen. We give you oil, we give you gas, we give you wheat. What do you have to offer? Well, we've got some bandages, and we've got some medicinal herbs, maybe a bit of opium. Is that cool? Deal. What? It's like, sweet, these guys are suckers. Anyway.
Yeah. Right?
Bad joke, I know. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's economy has deteriorated significantly since the Taliban takeover, with most of the country's population living below the poverty line, while the Taliban government struggles with sanctions and the lack of development aid the country enjoyed under its Western-supported government. Afghans are in great need. Acting Afghan Commerce and Industry Minister Haji Nuruddin Azizi told reporters, "Whatever we do it based on the national interest and the people's benefit." While details on specific prices and payment methods were not available, Azizi said that Russia would move the supplies to Afghanistan by road and rail. Well, obviously, because you can't get air. If both sides are satisfied with the deal during the temporary trial period, a longer-term deal is expected to be signed. Yes, they do have a lot of poppy fields, but poppy fields is for opium, I think, not heroin. Anyway, I think even Gavin used to tell us the stories about that, about the poppy fields, and how even our military had to help them protect those fields, even though they knew they were making opium out of it. Well, whatever. The Russian agreement with the Taliban comes more than 3 decades after the end of the Soviet-Afghan War. That's why I said strange bedfellows, by the way. A 9-year conflict that ended in a Soviet defeat and withdrawal from Afghanistan. In the aftermath, the civil war in Afghanistan eventually resulted in the Taliban's first takeover of the country in 1996. However, despite the positive development in relations with Russia, Azizi made it clear that the Taliban does not want to depend on only one country to help lift its struggling economy. A country shouldn't be dependent on just one country. We should have alternatives, he says. Right. So do a deal with the Mongols then. Strange bedfellows when the Russians are doing deals with the nation that defeated them. Embarrassingly defeated them. The Beast of War. If you haven't seen the movie, you're doing yourself a disservice. You should watch that. Bjorn asked, did you not lose your power? You want to go ahead and field that while I get the next story?
No, I did not. Oh,
you're just going to give him the short version. Okay. Fan. Moving on. What was it? I can't remember the name of that department store. I think it was called Spiegel, which obviously is German. So every time I see this picture, I'm like,
Ike?
No, every time I see this picture, I think of Ursula von der Leyen. I was like, oh, she must be one of the Spiegel underwear models. Anyway, European Union countries should impose, quote, biting sanctions on Russian trade and hit officials responsible for sham referendums held in parts of Ukraine as Moscow ramps up their war, senior EU officials said Wednesday. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, underwear model, kidding, said that the Kremlin orchestrated referendums on joining Russia are an illegal attempt to grab land and change international borders by force. Again, I'm going to say, well, no shit. We're determined to make the Kremlin pay for this further escalation, she says, as she unveiled what she described as sweeping new import bans on Russian products. This will keep Russian products out of the European market and deprive Russia of an additional 7 billion euros in revenue, von der Leyen told reporters in Brussels. She said that the EU's executive branch also advises extending the bloc's own export ban to deprive the Kremlin's military complex of key technologies, including electronic components and specific chemical substances. The proposals still must be endorsed by the bloc's 27 countries. Von der Leyen also said that the EU should, quote, lay the legal basis for a price cap on Russian oil, without elaborating. That's great. That's like saying we should change this right now. How? I don't know. The bloc already agreed to ban seaborne crude starting December 5th, but some member countries still require Russian supplies at low prices. Finance ministers for the Group of 7 industrial powers pledged this month to impose a cap on the price of Russian oil in a bid to limit the Kremlin's revenues, while also curtailing the war's impact on energy prices and inflation. The ministers said that they would impose the cap by barring insurance or shipping companies from helping Russia sell oil at prices above the set limit. On top of that, von der Leyen recommended a ban on EU nationals sitting on the governing bodies of Russian companies, saying that Russia should not benefit from European knowledge and expertise. Wow, that's kind of arrogant. People who help Russia to circumvent sanctions should also face sanctions themselves. Agreed, under the proposal outlined Wednesday. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said asset freezes and bans on travel in Europe would be imposed on the proxy Russian authorities in the Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia regions. Officials there said Wednesday that they would ask President Putin to incorporate their provinces into Russia. Borrell says he also wants to target senior Russian Defense Ministry officials and those who support the armed forces by providing it with equipment and weapons, or who help to recruit the 300,000 reservists that Putin has called up. Sanctions work. Sanctions matter. People say that, don't believe what they're saying, do they? But they have to be maintained over time and not circumvented, he says. So he admits they don't work, they don't matter, and they get circumvented. Gotcha. The European Commission has drawn up several drafts on sanctions against Russia since Putin launched an invasion of neighboring Ukraine 7 months ago. Banks, companies, and markets have been hit, even parts of the sensitive energy sector, with asset freezes and travel bans slapped on over 1,200 officials. But the hard work is yet to come. The economies of the EU's 27 member countries have been battered by the COVID-19 pandemic. See, we're hitting all the bases today. We've already hit climate change, now we're hitting Kung Flu. And are struggling against high inflation with skyrocketing electricity and natural gas prices. Sanctions are getting harder to agree as they also inflict damage at home. The last rounds of sanctions were announced on May 4th and took 4 weeks to gain bloc-wide approval as concerns over oil restrictions divided member countries. In July, rather than impose fresh measures, the EU adopted a maintenance and alignment package that mostly closed loopholes on sanctions already agreed upon. The actions ultimately agreed on this time are likely to be less ambitious than the Commission's recommendations and imposed only after much debate and hand-wringing among the 27 countries in coming weeks. Earlier Wednesday, an economic advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky, Oleg Ustenko, urged the EU to act as soon as possible and in particular to ban all fossil fuels coming from Russia. Ustenko said that the military call-up and Putin's nuclear threats justify a very strong response. Around 50% of Russia's budget revenues are coming from this sector, Ustenko says. Oil, gas, uranium, and coal. All of this should be banned. Someone should tell him that uranium is not a fossil fuel. Everything related to their fossil fuels should be cut off. They should not get a single penny out of these exports. What do you want to do? Just seize it and say, this is ours now? I think that's called theft. See, the problem with energy is you can try to ban it and sanction it, but someone is always going to buy it. And I can point to you the last time that we had this discussion. India bought it. India, our ally, bought it because they got it at a discount. Pennies on the dollar, supposedly. Because they're like, listen, we're an emerging economy, and we're trying to build our military. If we can get this shit cheaper, we're going to buy it. Because we need it. Because we're growing. We're emerging as a world power. We need this stuff. You guys deal with your own geopolitics. We're just getting cheap gas. That was their sort of take on it, as far as I'm aware. Allegedly. There you go.
Allegedly.
I can always get away with anything just by saying allegedly at the end, right?
No, not really, but
no.
Good try.
I could allegedly get away with it.
Possibly.
There you go. All right. Moving on. Thursday, September 29th, day 218. We're almost there, dude. Okay. This is titled... I didn't even know this was a country, honestly. I'm sorry if you're from there. I don't mean to offend. Dagestan. Not D-O-G. D-A-G-E. Dogostan? I don't know. Whatever. That'd be cool. If I ever start a country, I'm going to call it Dogostan. And the national flag will be...
Doge.
Yes! Okay. Cool. Yeah, Shiba Inu. Done. Good. Great idea.
I'm glad you agreed.
You'll be my minister of logos.
Okay.
All right. Moving on.
Two good ones.
Protests have broken out across Russia over the last week following a new decree by Russian President Putin, who called for 300,000 fighting-age men to be added to Moscow's ranks and shipped off to fight in Ukraine.
Didn't we already talk about this?
Yes, but I'm building on it. But one region in particular has grabbed headlines after hundreds were detained in Russia's first mobilization order since World War II in an area known as Dagestan. Located in the high Caucasus Mountains in southern Russia and sharing a border with two former Soviet states, Georgia and Azerbaijan, Dagestan's complex history has led to the outcry being seen today. The Putin regime has brought the people to the brink, one Dagestani political refugee was reported as saying. Ali Cherinsky fled from the Kremlin in 2016 after being accused of justifying terrorism in his work to cover human rights abuses across not only the Caucasus mountain regions, but in areas like Crimea as well. The political refugee, now located in Odessa, Ukraine, explained that anger over Putin's latest order in his home region stems from decades of oppression. After taking up the presidency in 2000 and his subsequent 22-year reign, including a second stint as prime minister from 2008 to 2012, this is a history lesson, Putin prioritized the agenda of unification and began cracking down on religious radicalism in the years following the 9/11 attacks on the U.S., Cherinsky says. Human rights advocates have argued that Putin's security measures lent credence to oppressive policies that targeted ethnic minorities in areas like Dagestan, predominantly a Muslim region. Aggression among ethnic minorities toward the Kremlin predates Putin's presidency, and turmoil in Dagestan arose with the Chechen fight for independence after the fall of the Soviet Union in December 1991. A series of deadly wars raged in Chechnya, which neighbors Dagestan's western border, starting in 1994 before a peace treaty was signed by then Russian President Boris Yeltsin in 1996, granting broad autonomy. But by 1999, Putin, in his first stint as a Russian prime minister, voided the treaty and launched a decades-long military campaign. By the end of the Second War, an estimated 160,000 civilians were believed to have been killed. Russia has since grappled with simmering insurgencies across the Caucasus Mountains. A partisan movement was formed in Dagestan, so it became the epicenter of those who still give armed resistance to Russia, Kerensky said in an interview translated with the help of the Ukraine Frontline media platform. But Moscow's attempts to crack down on radicalism created a system of unchecked police brutality that was impartial in who it targeted in Dagestan. The security forces in the fight against the partisans began to commit atrocities. They began to pressure relatives and acquaintances. Do you remember that thing I said about the men running away, leaving their wives and children behind?
Mm-hmm.
And what Putin would do? He already did it. That's why I came up with that idea. They began to pursue and pressure relatives and acquaintances, he says, adding that anybody could be pulled off the street and brutally interrogated under the guise of counterterrorism. They subjected people to terrible torture in the hope that they would confess to something, to anything, he says. It's like the Spanish Inquisition. Before he fled Russia, Kerensky said that he personally saw people dragged from the streets into unmarked cars and described how a relative of his was illegally detained for 2 days and tortured before being released. Now we're talking East German Stasi.
No, now we're talking proper KGB.
Well, yeah, but I mean, unmarked cars, Stasi pickups, disappeared 2 days later,
we're not
dropped off
in
beaten.
Eastern Europe. We're in Russia.
No, this is Dagestan.
It's Dagestan. Okay.
Yeah. Europe or Russia Light Junior?
Russia Light. Yeah,
Russia
I like
Light.
that one.
Yeah. Diet Russia.
Diet Russia.
Anyway, in the end, he was simply let go and forgotten, he says, noting that neither he or his family ever found out what his relative was even suspected of. And you know what's really funny? I suspect you're never going to get reparations either. But good on you for trying. Anyway, Kerensky explained that years of oppressive policies have created a prejudicial view of ethnic minorities, and reports this week suggested that minority groups like Dagestanis have been disproportionately targeted in Putin's war effort. The fact is, everything is chaotic in Russia, he says, claiming that the majority of Russians do not want to go fight in Ukraine. When full-fledged mobilization had already begun, they began to squeeze all of the juice out of Dagestan. As the largest republic of the Caucasus in terms of population, they took everyone. Kerensky said that the level of opposition in Dagestan has taken even its own residents by surprise, and he said Putin has brought them to the peak with his aggressive policies. I think he meant he brought them to the breaking point, but okay. The fact is that everything is chaotic in Russia, he says. For every Dagestani and Caucasian in general, it is now a fight for their relatives. Oops, sorry. Fight for their relatives' lives. Man, imagine if I did that on the news. That'd be embarrassing. That'd almost be as embarrassing as asking where a certain dead congresswoman is. Ooh, I went there. Anyway, I have a theory. I want to share this with you, Mike, because I want your opinion on this.
A game theory. Not wait.
No, real genuine theory.
Sorry.
Okay, so Dagestan is shit on by the Russian proper, right? People, oppression, ethnic cleansing, whatever. They've been attacked and beaten and downtrodden and everything, right? And now they're being disproportionately conscripted into the Russian military into a conflict where they're almost certainly going to die. Is this Putin's offhanded genocide of the Dagestanis?
Well,
he's taking all the fighting age men, which are also the breeding age men, right? And he's sending them to their almost certain death. It's his way of clearing out the region, because then he can just move in with fighting aged Russian men and, well, like in Braveheart, breed them out. Am I the only one who saw that, like, instantly? Did any of you even, like, did that kind of ring in the back of your minds too? Possibly.
Yeah.
You guys think on that. We'll talk about it again next week, I'm sure, when we find out that Dagestan has been destroyed or something in the news. That'd be crazy. Because there's no men left to defend it. That kind of thing. Moving on.
Yeah, Georgia will take it back.
Or the Chechens. I don't know.
No.
Somebody will. Every time there's a power vacuum, somebody moves in, right? Usually Taliban, but whatever. Moving on. Annex. Here's your map. Finally. Now you get to see how ridiculous this is. Because that's how much of the country they just stole. Because they said they said that that's what they wanted. That's what the people wanted, right? Bullshit. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday will officially begin annexing 4 more regions of Ukraine in a signing ceremony following the conclusion of self-run referenda this week that the West and Kyiv have decreed as a sham. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Thursday that the ceremony would take place in Moscow on agreements on the accession of new territories into the Russian Federation. He reported to Reuters. This is a Reuters story, by the way. The agreement will apparently be signed with all 4 territories that held referendums and made corresponding requests to the Russian side, he added. Bullshit. Moscow installed regional officials from Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia and Kherson are expected to represent the 4 regions after claiming to have achieved a monumental show of support for Russia's illegal seizure of Ukrainian territory. Polls closed Tuesday following 5 days of voting organized by Russian proxies who have claimed to have garnered 93% of civilian supports in Zaporizhia, 87% in Kherson, 98% in Luhansk, and 99% in Donetsk. Western officials have repeatedly rejected the referenda and have pointed out to the last move by Russia to annex parts of Ukraine when it held a 2014 vote in Crimea and claimed that some 97% of Crimeans supported leaving Ukraine. Reporting later showed that the election had been falsified, with only 30% of the total Crimean population even voting in the proceedings, and with just 15% of that population backing the annexation. So only 15% of 30% of the entire Crimean people actually voted for it. Right. Anyway, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said last week accused the Kremlin of bussing in Russians to vote in the referenda. Doesn't this sound like the shit that Democrats do here? Bussing people in, setting up the fake votes, making all these false, numbers of landslide victories. Doesn't this smack a little close to home to some of you? They're learning from us. Anyway. And Ukrainian officials over the weekend reported coercive tactics involving intimidation to force Ukrainians to vote. Annexing the 4 eastern and southern regions means Russia will begin to claim another 15% of Ukraine as Russian territory. So yeah, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson. If you take those pieces and add it with Crimea, you have stolen 15% of the total landmass of Ukraine. That's what they're saying. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. That's without Crimea. They already had it. So they were taking 15% on top of what they already took after Crimea. Huh. Anyway. Yeah. Moscow has reportedly said it will consider an attack on the regions where heavy fighting has persisted for 7 months as an attack on Russia itself, leaving some defense officials concerned that Russia could resort to even more aggressive tactics like nuclear escalation. Putin is expected to give a speech following the ceremony. Sidebar. Think about what they're saying here. They annexed the region, and they said, if you attack in these regions, we will consider that an attack against Russia. Then we'll nuke it. They're going to nuke their own new territories? Does that make any sense to you?
It does not.
Russians doing Russian things. We're going back to ocean farts. We're going back to ocean farts. See? Same picture. Right there, right there. That's the same one. So I'm just going to leave the thumbnail up instead. The NATO alliance issued a joint statement calling the Nordstream pipeline leaks a deliberate, reckless act of sabotage Thursday and urged an investigation. The NATO statement came hours after a fourth leak, remember I told you before we went on air, was discovered along the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline systems Thursday. The first 3 leaks all occurred and were discovered within 24 hours on Tuesday. You know, that was when you did hit or miss. Coincidence? Oh, you did hit or miss 3 pipeline explosions. Oh, well, I guess that's your alibi that you didn't do it.
That's exactly what that is.
Okay, we'll take that. That's your alibi. The damaged Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines in international waters in the Baltic Sea is of deep concern, NATO wrote in a statement. All currently available information indicates that this is the result of deliberate, reckless, and irresponsible acts of sabotage. These leaks are causing risks to shipping and substantial environmental damage, the statement continued. We support the investigations underway to determine the origin of the damage. Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline systems lie at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. 2 of the 4 leaks were discovered in Sweden's exclusive economic zone, while the other 2 were in Danish waters. Sweden discovered one hole in its Nord Stream 1 pipelines and the other hole in its Nord Stream 2 pipes. Denmark experienced the same. Seismologists say that they recorded explosions near the pipelines prior to the leaks. Neither pipeline system was in operation at the time of the explosions. Nord Stream 1 has been operating at only 20% capacity since July and stopped service entirely at the end of August. Operators stated that international sanctions against Russia had made maintenance impossible. Nord Stream 2, meanwhile, has never entered official operation as Germany declined to certify its completion last year. The project was stopped altogether just days ahead of Russia's invasion in Ukraine back on February 24th. Accusations have flown across Europe and the world following the leaks, with Ukraine arguing Russia is to blame. Moscow dismissed the accusation on Wednesday. It's quite predictable and also predictably stupid to give voice to these kinds of narratives, predictably stupid and absurd, Peskov said. This is a big problem for us because, firstly, both lines of the Nord Stream 2 are filled with gas. The entire system is ready to pump gas, and that gas is very expensive. Now the gas is flying off into the air. Are we interested in that? No, we're not. We have lost a route for gas supplies to Europe, he continued. That's a fair argument. But I still think Russians doing Russian things would do something that stupid. I really do. I'm not saying all the Russian people. I'm saying those in power. They could do something like that. Because if they're copying everything else that the left in our country does, then they would absolutely do it because page 1 of their playbook is preemptively accuse the other side of what you're guilty of first. So they would blow it up and say, you guys did it. Because, I mean, look who they're learning from. Moving on. I have 4 stories left, and I promise I'll let you go after that.
No, you won't.
Well, we're probably going to war shit after. Anyway.
Maybe.
HVS says I refer you to my previous post. Scroll up. How far? I'll just read all of it. Euro currency is falling faster than a brick thrown out of a helicopter. I think it's falling faster than a Chechen rebel being thrown out of a helicopter. That's a lot faster. Perhaps the Italian Navy can find some more Russian yachts to seize. Maybe. I saw some milsurp Italian Navy soup bowls on Sportsman Guide. Huh. Wait. Oh. Never mind. Let me go on. This story is titled 1100. And it's pretty sobering reading, so I'm going to take this one kind of seriously. Ukrainian forces continue to uncover gross human rights abuses and atrocities outside the eastern city of Izium, including a mass grave site with several burn pits containing about 1,100 partially charred bodies this week. Dead bodies smell the same everywhere, Special Operations Marine veteran Chad Robichaud says, describing the grisly sight he witnessed this week. I have a personal vested interest in this because I have two friends who actually volunteered. One left from Jersey, one left from New York. They both went back in like March or April. They were part of the guys who found this. They actually took a cadaver dog for a walk because the guy who trained the dog asked, "Hey, are you guys going out? Can you take my dog with you?" They just said, "Yeah, okay." They took the dog out. The dog started going crazy in this section of the woods that looked like Bella wood. You know what I mean? Like, the big trees were all cleared out. There's a bunch of little trees everywhere and a lot of disturbed ground. The cadaver dog went crazy. And then they called back to the guy who owned the dog, and he was like, "I don't know what's up with your dog, but he's going nuts." And then he said, "Well, describe to me what the dog is doing." And when he described to him what the dog was doing, that guy, he called an entire division of troops to go out to where the dogs and these guys were, and they found this. So I have a pretty vested interest in the story because I got to hear it firsthand from the guys who found it. Pretty gross. Let's see. The distinct smell of decaying people. Just to know that was women, children, and non-combatants, he continued before adding, Russia has the most land in the world and then comes in and forcibly tries to take more. And just to do this to these people who couldn't even defend themselves. It's just hard not to be emotionally upset and angry. It's just disgusting, he added. According to Robichaud, and one of his partners with the Mighty Oaks program, which has been in Ukraine since February, assisting soldiers on the front lines with trauma and medical counseling, Ukrainian forces this week discovered a series of partially covered mass graves in an area an hour southeast of Izium. I think that was the story last week where we talked about over 400 bodies. Anyway, the Special Ops veteran said that he was not permitted to disclose the exact location of the site, but said it was clear Russian soldiers were trying to conceal evidence of war crime. I know the exact location. I was told, but I can't tell you. I won't tell you on air. Some 1,100 Ukrainian men, women, and children, many with their hands found or bound behind their backs, were reportedly found in several pits roughly 20 by 30 feet that have originally been dug out to hide Russian tanks. There, they tried to burn the evidence of the bodies, Robichaud says, but they didn't do a very good job of it. They actually left 74 tanks in this one area, and they were using the tank positions to put the bodies in, he explains. Disturbing reports of extreme violence and war crimes committed against civilians, including other mass grave sites, evidence of torture, and extreme living conditions Ukrainians were forced to endure during 6 months of Russian occupation, continue to emerge as Russian forces retreat from areas in the southeast of Kharkiv. Russian forces have largely retreated from areas surrounding Izium in southeast Kharkiv, but Robichaud explained that it doesn't mean Russian soldiers are no longer a threat. Just because Ukraine retakes control of an area doesn't mean that equates to no Russians, he says. Robichaud described a chaotic scene and said that he and his team were with Ukrainian forces on the front lines, where attacks by Russian forces overhead and on the ground remain a very real threat. At least 60 deceased Russian soldiers were found this week as they continued to advance in the area, along with 15 Russian troops who surrendered. Reports of Russia's inability to maintain command and control in its ranks have emerged in the weeks following Ukraine's major counteroffensive, and, according to Robichaud, these issues stem from a lack of basic communication among Russia's own soldiers. They don't seem to have an inter-team communication system like we normally have, so they have no way to communicate. He says, adding that they do not appear very well trained, and they don't even know how to do basic navigation. They're just lost, walking around, almost like they have to get picked up because they wouldn't survive. Robichaud described the harsh dichotomy of war and said that Russian soldiers he's seen were not only undertrained, but they were young and terrified. You see these Russian soldiers, these kids who are like 18 to 20 years old. It's not hard to feel sorry for them because they're just kids that were forced to be out there. But then they participated in this, he says, referring to the litany of human rights abuses that have been reported. The ICC and several nations, including the US and its European allies, have opened investigations into alleged war crimes. But the Special Ops veteran argued that the West should be doing more to help Ukraine win this war more efficiently and faster. Well, we've already told you why we're not. Bullies don't stop bullying until somebody walks across... I like this saying. Bullies don't stop bullying until somebody walks across the playground and punches them in the middle of their face, he says. It's a problem that won't go away until someone draws a line and does something about it. That's what the world needs to know, he says. That's true. He's right. That's why I keep saying, we're not ending this war because we don't want to end this war. We're using it as a beta test. And I hate to say it that way, but that's the reality of it. Moving on, we're at Friday. We made it. You're here today, Friday, September 30th, day 219. I'm about to set you free. And this is the first picture I've used of said president in quite a while. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday said Kyiv has accelerated its application to join the NATO military alliance as Russia moved to annex 4 Ukrainian regions. It was not immediately clear how Kyiv has pushed its application along, but Zelensky, who has vowed to keep fighting Russia despite its illegal annexation, said Ukraine has already proven a compatible partner to NATO. De facto, we have already proven compatibility with alliance standards. They are real for Ukraine, real on the battlefield and in all aspects of our interaction, he says. We trust each other, we help each other, and we protect each other. This is how an alliance is supposed to work. Well, he's right. Zelensky's comments followed a speech and signing ceremony led by Russian President Putin, in which he claimed Moscow had received overwhelming support for its illegal seizure. Putin laid claim to the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions in a hostile speech that threatened to use all available means to guard the territory and the forever Russian citizens now residing there. Are they forever because they're all dead and in the ground? Maybe? I don't know. Putin said that the West, in supporting Ukraine, has acted as a parasite by using its financial and technological strength to rob the entire world. Sidebar. We're using our financial strength to rob the world. We're paying into a country's conflict to rob the world? How's that work? Anyway. NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg has not publicly commented on Putin's speech. The European Union responded to Putin's hostile address by condemning the illegal annexation as a further violation of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Putin called on Ukraine to rejoin peace talks, but said handing back the occupied regions was off the table. Zelensky has already said that he will not engage with Russia in peace talks if they attempt to unilaterally seize Ukrainian territory. So, why would I come to the table if you're still taking my country away from me? That's a fair thing. Moving on. And this is where things get rather interesting, because I'm going to show you the faces of the axis of evil and their names. If you're watching this, you might want to do this in full screen to read the captions, because I can't blow it up any bigger for you. There you go. Doesn't that picture look like some super lame, like, economic summit pep rally or some shit? Anyway.
It looks like a Russian pep rally.
It's a pathetic pep rally. Anyway. Russian President Vladimir Putin came out swinging at the U.S. on Friday in an aggressive speech as he announced the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. In a message... What's that?
Here it comes, the annexation.
Yeah.
All right. World War III has officially started.
Well, yes. In a
Now
message,
because annexation.
what?
World War doesn't start unless a country annexes another.
Oh no, it's always interesting, dude. Anyway, Russian President Putin came out swinging at the U.S. on Friday in an aggressive speech as he announced the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. In a message that was already expected to be hostile, Putin further escalated threats against Ukraine and the West by saying that the U.S. set a precedent of nuclear warfare by hitting Japan with atomic bombs during World War II. Fears have mounted since last week when Putin said he was not bluffing after he warned that Moscow would use all weapon systems available to defend Russian territory. In a speech to an audience that looked scared and resolute, Putin furthered these comments Friday and said that all Ukrainian citizens living in the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions will now forever be a part of Russia, and vowed to use all available means to protect them if those regions are attacked. So he just basically slammed the Iron Curtain over the top of them, right? You're forever us. You are my prisoner. That's basically what he's saying. It remains unclear what type of attack would be viewed as an existential threat to Russia in those regions, as brutal warfare has raged there in Russia since Russia invaded in February. I don't know.
How would they know? It's already a war zone already, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't burn dust, right?
No, you can't.
It looks like he's in a very fighting spirit. The gloves have come off. Russia expert and former intelligence officer Rebecca Koffler, remember her? Describing the speech as super aggressive. There's no way back, it looks like for him. He's ready for the fight, she added. Koffler says Putin has readied the groundwork to, in his view, legitimately be able to deploy nuclear weapons in Ukraine as the threat of defeat mounts as the West, particularly the U.S., deploys superior weaponry to Kyiv. Koffler said Putin's speech was staged in a manner that was almost like a direct challenge to the West. He spoke directly not only to the Russian people, but also to Ukrainian President Zelensky, to Ukraine. She added, noting that Putin's reference to the U.S. as Kyiv's real owners. The Russia expert explained that Putin, a former KGB operative, is a specialist in manipulation and pushed all the right buzzwords in his speech by referring to his historical figures like Catherine the Great to fire up his supporters at home. History has called us to a battlefield to fight for our people, for the grand historic Russia, for future generations, he says in his fiery speech. Despite reports of a mass exodus of men fleeing Russia and nationwide protests following an order to send another 300,000 soldiers to fight in Ukraine, Koffler explained that Putin is surrounded by people who would support his use of nuclear weapons, no matter the cost of human life. There's a different relationship with life and the kind of sacrifices they're willing to tolerate, she says, adding that there is a sense of pride that Russia can outsuffer the enemy. Remember in the beginning of this so-called special operation that they let Russian forces march through the area around Chernobyl? It's just a very different mentality, Koffler added. It remains unclear how the U.S. or its NATO allies would respond if Russia deploys a nuclear warhead in Ukraine. I don't know. I don't know. But those are the 5 faces of idiots. And we made it to the last story of the day. Number 22. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, in a telephone call Friday with Ukrainian President Zelensky, condemned Russia's new annexation of parts of Ukraine as illegal and a violation of the country's sovereignty. I told him that the process that Russia called a referendum and its annexation of parts of Ukraine should never be accepted, and that I strongly condemn them, Kishida says afterwards. He also says that he reassured Zelensky in their 30-minute conversation that Japan is committed to working with other group of 7 nations and that the broader international community in further supporting Ukraine, and plans to impose more sanctions against Russia. Western leaders, including President Joe Biden, have also condemned Russia's annexation of 4 occupied Ukrainian regions days after voters supposedly approved Moscow-managed referendums on joining Russia. Kishida, who is to host a meeting of leaders of the Group of 7 industrialized nations next year, told Zelensky he plans to propose that they impose tough sanctions against Russia and will lead a discussion on Ukraine's reconstruction. He said Japan is assessing when it can reopen its embassy in Kyiv, which he described as important for close contacts between Japan and Ukraine. Japan closed its embassy in March as Russia's invasion of Ukraine intensified and moved part of its operations to Lviv in western Ukraine. Japan has closely cooperated with other G7 members and European nations in imposing sanctions on Russia over its war in Ukraine. Most recently, Japan banned exports of sensitive materials that could be used to make chemical weapons. Japan's sanctions against Russia have further damaged their ties, already strained over a group of islands taken by Moscow at the end of World War II, that have prevented the two countries from signing a peace treaty formally ending their war hostilities. In retaliation for Tokyo's sanctions, Moscow terminated peace talks, including negotiations over the disputed islands. Russians doing Russian things. Pissing off everybody. Assuming everything. Stealing territory. All while retreating, destroying infrastructure, covering up evidence of genocide, and having tens of thousands of his own citizens of fighting age making their way to the exits, seeking asylum elsewhere. And tomorrow will be October 1st. Tomorrow will be day 220 of this war.
And it's not over yet.
October. Then comes November. Then we're in a deep Eastern European, very cold winter. So the question that I started the show with, I have to ask again. Is the writing on the wall? If they're fleeing their country, if they're avoiding conscription, if they do false referendums to annex territory, to gain a political victory in the eyes of his supporters who watch state-run propaganda TV, if the atrocities and human rights violations keep showing up, if their Nordstream pipelines keep getting sabotaged, what's going to happen first? Will Russia finally run out of bullets, beans, antibiotics, and bodies and leave with their tail between their legs in defeat? Or will the winter come first? Because once it starts snowing and the temperatures start going into the single digits, the Russian military don't have to fight anymore. They can just sit back and watch Ukraine crumble from the lack of energy or heating oil or natural gas. He can starve them out. I mean, there'll be skirmishes and whatnot. It'll be like the Battle of Bastogne. Bastogne? Bastogne. It's kind of a similar thing. Wait out the winter. See who comes out better on the other end of it. Well, they turn the taps off of oil, gas, and coal, I think. The things that Ukraine needs to keep the lights on and the heat going. Who blinks first? I guess is a good way to ask that question. What do you think, Mike? Who blinks first? Does Russia say enough?
Eventually, they're going to have to. They're eventually going to have to say enough, and either, as you say, go and start a nuclear winter, or just give up and say, okay, fine, you guys win, we'll leave. And you don't think they're going to be sore losers like that, but again, no, they've got the whole world against them. Their currency is literally worthless.
No, that
they
bounced back.
they have to trade with, lesser countries. Honestly, I don't see Russia winning this one.
Right, but what happens first? Do they fail first, or does the winner come first?
The winner is already here.
Not there. It hasn't gotten into the polar temperatures yet, but it's coming. Winter is coming. Cliche.
Winter's coming.
That's what I'm saying. Can Russia hold out longer than the Ukrainians holding out with no fire and heat and electricity or whatever, right? Like, who blinks first there? Do you think the Russians will actually hold out longer through the winter, or do you think the Ukrainians or do you think the Russians will give up before then? That's I guess that the big question is.
Well, look at what's happening with the conscripts. If the conscripts keep running away or surrendering, they're not going to have much of a military. So it all depends on what happens, honestly.
Okay, so let me pose this question to you. You're saying that they had to conscript. We've been showing stories all night. 300,000 seems to be the number, but there's an estimate that they actually went to 1 million. They don't have enough weapons, first of all, because they're doing weapons deals with North Korea.
And we've also seen some of the weapons they're issuing to troops via Scott.
Yeah, clapped out rusty AKs.
Rusty AKs, which they look, I've seen AKs that have come back from that, from Africa, but the ones they're giving out are like, where were you keeping these? In your mother's damp basement?
They were wrapped with the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're in pretty poor shape.
They're piss poor shape.
But see, this is the question I posed to you, right? They're doing all that, and yet we're constantly being told the Russians are holding back their elites in the defense of Moscow. Right? Why? Like, who are you defending in Moscow if the Ukrainians have repeatedly said, we're not crossing into your territory, we're just trying to push you out of ours? Who are they defending against?
They say they're elites. I question they have any elites left. Did everybody? To me, it looks like everybody retired and left.
I get the impression that their military is as untested today as the Chinese military. And that's not an insult to either military. I'm just saying that they don't have seasoned and salty veterans anymore. Like you said, they're all retired out or they're dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, China and Russia, two biggest geographical countries, right? They own, or they hold, what, 2/3 of the East? Is that fair to say? The other third being African, let's say 50%. I don't know. Let's say 2/3, because Asia's huge, and then China's pretty big, right? So.
Yeah, but remember, South Asia really doesn't like China.
No, I know. All I'm saying is those two, the giants of geographical territory, also have almost no military experience. They haven't been in a war. China hasn't been in a war since a war came to them. That's fact. So how good could they be? Like you said, no leadership. They don't even have fucking comms. People are getting lost in their retreat. I don't even know how. I don't even know how to answer the question.
The bridges and the roads they're using to try and get their supplies in are getting bombed and attacked by the Ukrainians because they don't want them to bring any more shit in.
Right.
So, honestly, yeah, it seems all those Soviets that used to be that were in wars and conflicts, they've either died off or they're gone because they don't care. They don't give a damn anymore.
I still don't know how to answer my own question.
You've got as you said, you've got this current military, which, you know, can't even twiddle their own asshole, and
that would be a pretty flexible.
Yeah.
Orifice.
Well, you know, I'm using it as an example because we've seen how magnificently they've attacked the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at one point it looked like they were going to overtake the Ukraine, and then, you know,
completely
they lost
failed.
everything. You know, case in point about supplies, that mile-long convoy that just stopped midway.
Yeah. 47-mile-long convoy.
Oh, was it 47? I thought it was a mile.
7-mile-long convoy.
You know, and then they just leave their tanks lying around, and, you know, the enterprising farmers start running off with them with tractors.
The guy that found all those bodies in Izium that I was telling you about, he didn't even tell me that they found 72 tanks just sitting there. He didn't mention the tanks. The story did, but he didn't tell me that.
He probably kept them, that's why.
Wow. I mean,
I don't blame him either.
I mean, are you really going to brag that you found 72 T-54s? Probably not. Probably not.
I mean, if they're T-72s or T-90s, maybe.
Yeah. So,
it's just, honestly, I don't know what's going to happen, and no one really knows until it actually happens.
I think the answer to this is the winter will come first.
Winter's going to come no matter what, period.
Right, yes. But I think it's going to come first. I think what's going to end up happening is the Russians are going to dig in, and it's going to turn into an attrition war, right? They're going to dig in, and they're going to try to wait out the Ukrainians that are freezing to death, ultimately, thinking that it's going to bring them to the negotiating table. What they seem to forget, though, is their own history. Because once upon a time, there was a bitter winter, and it was the Russians who had to hold out in freezing temperatures, while the Nazi regime laid siege to Stalingrad. So it's like, Ukrainians had a good lesson to work with, and the Russians seem to forget their own history in that sense. Anyway, there was only one update since I did the show with a story. And basically what it is it's people finally saying the quiet part out loud. And the headline reads, "If Ukraine joins NATO, that means World War." Which, if you've been listening to this show for as long as I've been doing it, we've been saying that the entire time, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I'm going to play this. Because we have spent 2 hours and 40 minutes of your time. And if you have been here the entire time in the chat like HVS, I really appreciate you taking the time of your day to hang out with us. If you're new to my channel, welcome. But if you're a regular here, welcome back. Either way, check out my other playlists and see if my other interests might be of interest to you. This was the War Room. This was day 219. We will be back in 1 week's time for day 226. Does that sound right? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
So anyway, we will see you then. So in the meantime, Slava Ukraini.
I'm Slava.
And good night.
Shall not be infringed.